Hello, everybody. I am Michael Bean, and this is your lesson from myfreeactingclass.com for Wednesday, February the 24th. Today, we are just catching up, making up for some lost time. Normally, Tuesdays are self-tape review. Anybody who is watching this now, or anybody who is watching this at home, or really anybody, can send us a self-tape, whether it's a practice script. You can pull the exercises off of the website, myfreeactingclass.com. You scroll down, you'll see the little link, practice exercises in blue. You click it, it'll take it to the thing. Or you can submit a tape for an audition you've done. We're going to see a couple of those today. And I will make time to go through them and offer notes. We're going to use those to talk about camera technique. And we've got just like a real range in setups today. Claudine was kind enough to send some tapes of her kids, and she's got like a very slick setup at home, so you'll be able to see that, and then sort of everything in between. The little bit of context, because I see we have a new body with us today. I run an acting school in Vancouver, BC, called Biz Studio. I've been teaching for almost 20 years, mostly young folks, although I've been teaching adults for the last 5. And coming up in the end of March, I will have been doing these free classes for almost a year. So there's my personal pedigree, and it doesn't mean that I know all the things there is to know, but it means I probably know enough to be useful. So before I get started looking at the tapes, I want to just throw out there something that I was talking to a parent about just recently, which is this idea that when you talk to actors who've taken in-person classes before, and just by sort of like a quick show of hands, how many of you have taken in-person classes, acting classes before? Yeah, Christina, have you done it? What about you, Ireland? Have you taken in-person classes before?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Candy, I know has. I don't know if Amy and Jade have, but I assume they have. We're going to imagine that their hands are there. One of the things that I hear from students on a really regular basis is this idea that it just feels different, right? That doing their tapes by Zoom, doing the recordings by Zoom, that it feels different to them. They're like, like I miss being in the room. I miss being there in person. So something that is really present for me as a teacher, especially having taught so much over Zoom in the last year. I've been teaching multiple classes a week, sometimes as many as like 6 or 7 different classes a week between the free classes and classes at my school and my adult classes. And I can say with a pretty high degree of confidence that it feels different for the actor. So the subjective experience, definitely very different, where it's, but the tape is very nearly identical. Yeah, and that's really interesting to me, because that to me says that like if the tape's very nearly identical, then that says that like, it feels so different. I think that hidden in that is a worry that like my acting's not as good if I'm not in person. And I think it's actually just a matter of like, if you don't have somebody's eyeballs to look into in real life, of course, yeah, it feels different. Yeah, and you, the actor, might not actually feel as connected. Like I think the subjective experience, it's common enough for actors to say that I think across the board, it does actually feel different for people. But that's different from better and worse. And so I think it is possible for the work to be just as good, if you're doing it from home. And especially because you have so much control over your own sort of adrenaline levels and safety. And if you're watching your own tapes and being like, I don't know, they're just kind of like, if you're not feeling excited about them, then I strongly recommend that exercise that I talked about last week of set it up the way you like it, get it technically set up the way you like it, and then do a couple of tuck jumps or burpees or jumping jacks. Really get your heart pumping. Ideally, you want to find the right amount of like, the reason I suggest tuck jumps, like sort of like jumping and tucking your knees up into your chest a couple of times, because that'll get your heart rate going like crazy, but it won't necessarily get you out of breath. Because you don't want to go into your scene like, I mean, unless that's what the scene's about, you probably don't want to start your scenes like that. But that extra level of energy is going to make you come across more engaged. It'll get you out of your head a little bit. So strongly recommend it. Now, let's look at some tapes. I think let's start with looking at Jade's tape. Jade sent us sort of another take of a scene that she did, by hand the other day. Here we are. Okay, so here's the one that Jade sent us previously, where she was holding the phone in her hand, and she was a very good sport about me giving her a hard time about holding the phone in her hand. So what's right about this is neutral background, not distracting. Yes, she's getting some light reflection on the door that's behind her. Is it a big deal? I don't think so. Like ideally, yes, you would have something that is like not even reflective, so that all of the attention is down here. But as long as it's a neutral background, not distracting, then I think you're fine. Medium close-up, so we're seeing just from the top of her head down to just below her armpits. We're not seeing any more of her, and we don't need to. So if we're back to looking at just me for a second, ta-da! If I was to back up even this far, so that you're seeing more of me, unless there's a bunch of action in the scene that's really important that you see, I think that from this far back, you're just not going to, it's not going to seem to the audience like you can feel as much. So you want to get up nice and close into that medium close-up, not into an actual close-up, just the head. Although it's fine if, you're doing a scene and you need to like lean in for a second, I think totally fine. Is something that we can do more of with our self-tapes than we could previously. That's what's working here is the medium close-up and that setup, and the neutral background. What's missing here for me is the eye light, right? So the light between her, the light that's reflected in her eyes. And again, if you just look at my tape, ta-da, you can see that I have a light reflected in my eyes because I have a ring light directly behind my computer. It doesn't have to be that. It can really easily be a large window or something you set up across from, or in a pinch, a desk lamp with a piece of paper clipped on it. I know I've had somebody post on one of the YouTube videos recently, like, a piece of paper, a desk lamp, really? It's like, yeah, like it really does work. I've seen it work. Yeah, it's not perfect. It throws a shadow on the back, but like it beats nothing. And if your eyes are sparkly, that's what makes people feel like you're alive. So that's the sort of basic camera technique. And then eye line, the line between her eyes and what she's looking at, I think this one's just right. Her eye line is just beside the camera, right? So just one side or just the other side, without turning her head too much, so we're not seeing too much profile. So the main thing is the eye light, and then of course the handheld camera. Here is the second tape. Same kind of basic idea. Right, we've got this time the background's a little bit more distracting. The frame's a little bit wider. The lighting is definitely better though, at least to my eyes. But what's really fascinating to me watching it, and we're just going to watch the start of it, is that in this first one, she's really taking her time with it. She's really taking her time with the transitions between it, and it's sort of more alive. Yeah, and it makes sense. She's juggling. She's got the phone in her hand. It looks like she's not thinking it through too carefully. And then this one, I would say that she's got all the technical things, these technical things right, but it's flatter and she's rushing in between the transitions. So this is one of those times where, if I was working with her, I would be like, great, cool. Now you've got it all technically set up. Now jump up and down a bunch, get your heart rate up, and see if you can bring some of that like fresh, improvised quality to it that you have. I've talked about this in lessons before, but it's very, very normal, that like when you first do something, it gets like real fresh and interesting kind of right away. And then as you continue to rehearse, it's really normal for it to get worse before it gets better. Because immediately, like you're not thinking about it too much, you kind of just barely know the lines. It doesn't have that same level of technical sophistication to it, but it is really alive, or it can be really alive. If you want to get back to that kind of aliveness and bring in the technical sophistication, it just takes more time. But if you are interested in being competitive professionally, I believe it's worth putting that time in. Right. In general, I would say that like getting that super fresh take, maybe takes you like the first, like a quarter of the time. You're getting like a true, right? So as though like, okay, it's a page of lines, I can like read it over 6 times and just kind of do more or less an approximation of it, and I can do that in 20 minutes if I need to, plus whatever time it takes me to set up my gear and, to upload the video. But if I really want to do a skilled job and have a shot, not just at this audition, but at the next one and the next one and the next one, then I think it's really in my best interest to put in that like an hour, an hour and 20 to really plan that extra time to go like, yep, first it's going to be really fresh and then it's going to get a little bit flat. And then if I just stay with it, it's going to start to come alive again because as I keep running it, I'm gonna have to think about it less and less and less. And that's when it comes alive and I get to start playing with it again. So.
Give that to me.
Right? Delight, aliveness. She's taking her time, sort of great idiosyncratic face making.
Completely different clothes and be completely different people. What do you think of Russell?
Good. And let's just zoom in on that transition there. Like, do you see how much subtext there is? And she's not planning it. She's not planning all the little faces she's making. But it's as though there are like 3 different thoughts, that happen in between, right? So there's thoughts and feelings, and they translate, because she's taking her time with it, because she's got some kind. It's alive in her in some way. Right, and we see it in her face, and we see it, in her expression. And I don't think she's planning those expressions, or my guess is that we'd catch her at them.
What do you think of Russell?
But still, they're coming through nice and clear. And then if we watch this new one, like I said, technically more proficient, right? So the camera's locked off. She's found a good setup for it.
Give that to me.
Right, and so it's she says, yeah, give it back to me, but she doesn't move at all. Like she doesn't go after it like she did in the first one.
When we go to Morocco, I think we should wear completely different clothes and be completely different people. What do you think of Russell?
Good. And and so she's doing some of the shape of it, like she's taking a pause, she's dropping her eyes. But I think this is a great example, of the difference between taking that transition and really having it be alive and finding it, and then sort of the rehearsed in version of it here. Now, to be totally fair to Jade, she did say that her focus on this one was enunciation, was on speaking as clearly as possible. So it's so while it might be a good sort of clear lesson for everybody else, for Jade specifically, maybe this is exactly the right thing because her attention is in this one spot, which is like, am I speaking as clearly as possible? Yeah, so her attention may be in just the right place. Now let's look at this one from Duke. Duke was here yesterday. He's mostly able to watch the tape, so excited to show him the tape. He said there wasn't much of a breakdown. The storyline was based on a true events. A group of students in China's equivalent of the MIT risk their lives to help a foreign reporter break censorship of a deadly persecution. And that the person he's auditioning for cares about the welfare of the people working for him. Right, so right away, in the first, we're 3 seconds in and we haven't seen his eyes yet. So I got this from, oh gosh, I don't remember her last name. The teacher's name is Zibby Davies, maybe. She used to teach with JBA or Jeb Beach and Associates, and now I believe she's teaching on her own. But one of the tips that I lifted from Zibby, who has worked a lot professionally, is in the first second of your tape, make sure that you make eye contact with all of the people who are in the scene, right? I think this is too long to not see Duke's eyes. In the first couple of seconds, we've made a decision about who he is. Now, nice clear backdrop, looks to me, like it's paper, which I think is just like one of the best inexpensive background options, right? Like you get a couple of big pieces of paper and you stick them together just like this. The external mic would have been nice to have placed outside of the camera because it does draw focus. I find that my eyes end up going to it. But head and shoulders, I'd tip the camera down just a little bit. We don't need the space over the head. And aside from that, lighting's good, background's good, framing's good.
Dr. Klein.
It's Daniel.
Okay. Again, I think we're seeing not quite enough eyelight here. More eyelight is going to make it seem more alive.
That doesn't sound good.
Good. So far, super honest, super clear, right? Like he's got this great deep voice. He's not putting too much on it. it's coming across very realistic.
So what have you got for me?
You need to recall.
Right. So far, all of this, is reading as very filmic. And I paused it here because now we can see, now that his eyes are up, you can see a little bit of that light reflected in his eyes. And it really does change the feel of it, especially if we were zoomed in. Now, he could even record it like this, if this was what was most convenient for his setup or what he's got the camera on top of. And then he could put it into a movie editing program and edit out, the stuff in the corners and sort of put it into the medium close up.
Well, hold on. Before you waste your time pitching it, you should know the paper has a contract with the Chinese Travel Bureau.
Why did you get into this business, Patrick? Because I don't think it was about pleasing advertisers.
You begged me to get you back there. Whatever it took. What it took was a guarantee that you wouldn't actively ignore the government's wishes.
I get that.
Do you get it? Because
Good. And so this is where for me as a listener, what he's doing with his face and what he's doing with his voice, start to diverge a little bit. And so as an audience member, I don't know Duke's work enough to know exactly what exercise to suggest. But the choices here, seem to me to indicate urgency, that like this is very important, but I'm not hearing it in his voice, and so I don't know if that's like a habit of speech, if this is just how he talks. Certainly the audio is nice and clear because of this external mic that he's got, pinned to him. There's a little bit of like a hiss of background noise. I've recently learned with my own phone that I've stopped using my external mic because I actually get more of this white noise in the background. So Duke, it might be worth looking at that and experimenting. But I would say that if you want to like build the intensity, then you could try putting in more physicality. But I think for me, listening particularly, it's vocal here. That like, can you raise the intensity without necessarily raising the volume any higher than it is here? Like, can you go further with it?
because I feel like yet again I'm having to explain to you that you spent the last 10 years trying to claw your way back into the country, and now you're just going to...
I said I get it. I got it.
All right then. So regular beat? Maybe a Beijing restaurant guide? Tell me about some monuments?
Yep.
And it looks like to me that his character is supposed to be in authority, and so if that's the case, I would right that if his character is supposed to be the boss, then I would put him in a blazer, or a colored shirt. I could just put him in something just like a touch sort of more like formal or professional looking, right off the top, and then we would workshop this beat in the middle, by getting him to do stuff like, hey, I'm the boss. Like, right, even though it doesn't literally make sense for him to lean in because he's talking on the phone, because you're still telling a story on camera, that's something you could do, right? You're here, you can move in closer as you're talking on the phone, if that helps with the intensity. But I think particularly we work on voice and objective there. Okay, let's look at some more of these. If Duke was here, this is where I would say, hey, Duke, what do you think of that? But Duke is not here. So instead, let's look at Candy's tape. Now, Candy, once again, chose to do this exercise of sharing something that is from a professional, basically a recreation of a scene from a TV show that she likes.
I guess we're never going to know if the bird defense worked. Such a bummer, too. We have this pool at my office.
Okay, hey. I got something to say to you, man.
What?
I break for birds. I rock a lot of polka dots. I have touched glitter in the last 24 hours. I spend my entire day talking to children. And I find it fundamentally strange that you're not a dessert person. That's just weird and it freaks me out. And I'm sorry, I don't talk like Murphy Brown. And I hate your pantsuit. I wish it had ribbons on it or something to make it just slightly cuter. And that doesn't mean I'm not smart and tough and strong.
Right, so we've got Head and Shoulders, neutral background, right, she's framed out this bright spot, which I keep, asking her about. And so she's like, just, stuck it like a little bit further out of frame, which is good. We got a little eyelight. We could use more, of course, but if there was one right behind the camera, it might also reflect in her glasses. So in terms of camera setup, her eyeline's just right beside the camera. The eyeline candy could actually be a little bit closer to camera, I think. When I'm taping with just my phone, for instance, if I've got a real person, I will put them so like their eyeballs just sort of like overlap just to the other side of the phone from where the camera is. And if I'm not recording with a person, then I'll like if the camera's on one end and like the stop and record button is on the other side, I'll use that little red stop and record button as my eyeline. So it's very, very close to camera so that we can see lots of you. That's not a big deal, but it's just like a way to tweak just a little more, technicality out of there. Now, let me just stop the share for a second. Candy, how do you feel about me showing the tape from the original TV show and talking about the comparison? That's if you had not sent a copy of the original video, that's okay, great. If you had not sent the copy of the original video, I would not normally do that. So just so you know, Candy is basically giving herself an activity that is more challenging than I would normally give because I find that comparison tends to usually put people in a bad place. But Candy's like, no, I love it, or something. And Candy had an opinion about all this stuff, right? Hey, man, let me talk to you. Like this, she feels really connected to this character. She loves this character, and Candy, has been really clear about the fact that like she's just sort of getting this started after sort of wanting to put time and energy into acting, but it's only in this last year that she's been really like putting a bunch of time and energy into it. And so I would say as an acting teacher that her opinion is fairly general. That her opinion about a lot of the things that she's saying in her tape comes across very similarly. And so once again, like the last tape, Candy, I would say that with this one, you could definitely up the energy level even more. Especially and physically, you would need a strong, clear start because what you've got is, like really 10 seconds, of you just kind of standing and waiting, and if you're coming in and thinking hard about this, then like you walk in, and like show us physicality, show us what's happening. It's like, okay, I'm gonna get out of here. You know what? Actually, no, I'm gonna turn around and talk to you, something like that. Right? If I was taping it, we might do that. I know that in the movie or in the TV show, your character is following the other character, but this one, maybe you could start with like by walking away from the camera and then turn around and confront her. That probably would work better in terms of a self-tape. And that's like a very small adjustment. And then once we get into the actual material, I think not more volume, and everybody will see when we play the original clip, she's not shouting, but specificity of opinion.
We're never gonna know if the bird defense.
I got something to say to you, man.
What?
That pause, much too long for this kind of comedy. And that's on your reader. But if your reader is that slow with your what, then just plow over top of her line and jump into your next line.
I break for birds.
Right? Because it needed to be, I've got something to say to you, man. What? I break for birds. And if your reader's like, and is thinking about what to say and looking at the paper, then just like roll right over top of her, especially in the context of practice. Obviously, if you're on set, they'll make whatever corrections, they'll rehearse it whatever way they need to. But in your own tape, don't be polite to the reader and let them mess up your timing like that. Right? So I break for birds.
I rock a lot of polka dots.
I rock a lot of polka dots. Da 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 da. Right? It's got almost the exact same rhythm as the previous line.
I have touched glitter in the last 24 hours.
I have touched glitter in the last 24 hours. Right? So that it's all very similar. It's like I'm making these points, but the value of each of the points is similar. And so, like I said, because Candy's super brave and she gave us this scene as example, let's see if we can just find the spot where the confrontation starts.
Man, what? I break for birds. I rock a lot of polka dots. I haven't touched glitter in the last 24 hours.
Right? So, 1 second. Third thing, right? Can you hear the difference of opinion in each of those things? And sure, some of it is just the kinds of inflections that somebody who's done a lot of comedy will play with, but there's that specificity there.
I spend my entire day talking to children, and I find it fundamentally strange that you're not a dessert person. That's just weird. And it's
right? She's confronting her. She's really confronting her, and she's not shouting it, but there's more intensity, than we saw in Candy's tape, I think. And so that's just that thing to play with. Like, can you up the intensity without upping the volume? Incidentally, this is called an over-the-shoulder shot. You see these in TV shows a lot. Never do one for an audition. Let's hope that goes without saying. But that means that this actor has a mark and has literally been told to not move. And it's just like standing on a piece of tape, because if she even shifts her weight slightly, her shoulder's going to take up this space in between them, or even get in on top of the other lady's face. This is the kind of thing you're expected to do on set, and one of the best reasons to do independent films and student films, so you can get used to doing these kind of technical shots that you just will not ever need to practice in auditions. But when you get to set, it'll be necessary to at least pretend you know exactly what they're talking about when they say stand on this mark and don't move. Because if you're like, sure I will, and but it's okay if I rock these couple of millimeters, then they're going to need to cut and reset, and they might be grumpy about it. If you're lucky, they'll know it's your first time on set, because you will have said to them, hey, like, I'm excited to be here, like, can you help me with some of the technical things? I don't necessarily know what all the words mean. Or you will have booked a coach beforehand, before you get onto set for your first time. You're like, oh my God, this is really exciting, but I also am freaked out, like, so can you talk me through some of this stuff? Right? There are ways to be prepared, and most of them involve asking for help, either from the people on set or from your coach before you go in, so that you can show up and do professional work and not need to sort of slow everybody down, or panic, like, oh God, I don't know what that means. Right? It's fine to not know what it means, to not know what the words mean. You just want to make sure you know exactly who to ask, and that you can be really clear and professional about it, so that you can keep your own status in the process. Now let's look at some of the tapes that Claudine sent in. Right, so I don't know if you remember, this is a script that we looked at a couple of weeks ago, I think. So you can see really clear eyelight. Now it helps that she's 5, and so she's got those big eyes, especially in the medium close-up. But medium close-up, like, we can really see her. There's nothing distracting in the background. Good clear light. We want to see the girl.
Will Daddy be home on Saturday? I want him to take me to the climbing wall.
I could take you.
He always takes me.
He'll be home.
Promise?
Promise.
Great. And then getting a more detailed performance than this out of a 5-year-old is tricky, especially on short notice. Like, the fact that she's saying the words, that it sounds like her talking, that she's not doing a whole bunch of like distracting physical things. All of that actually is like really, really successful. I mean, think about how fidgety 5-year-olds are, and then how still she is being, and how she is looking, where she needs to look. Like, and she's not looking directly at the camera ever. If you've never worked with 5-year-olds before, trust me when I say all of those things are accomplishments in terms of performance here. Now from that, if I was coaching it, like, probably what I would try is like have her lean back in the chair, as though she's getting ready for bed, and then, sit forward and basically like use physical behavior, to show us, that she's worried, but you wouldn't need to tell her that. You're just like, okay, you're in bed. And then when I say this, and then from the other side of the camera, if she forgets, I might go like, and so she actually like sits up, and says, and give me that first line. And then in terms of arc of the scene, change from the beginning to the end, when she hears, yes, I promise, I think that it would be important, for the character, to take that in, like, oh, and if Victoria has trouble with that, or like if you were working with Victoria on that Claudine, and she just like, and the smile was like really fake or forced or something, then you just say, okay, well then, when you hear the promise, just relax back into bed, like, and have her, and you could have her settle back into bed, and you could even say, okay. Sometimes I will do that especially with 5 and 6-year-olds. I will often, I will sometimes, especially when coaching them, do something that I would never do with an older actor. I will straight up give them a line reading. I will say the line like this. And I would never do that with like even an actor who's like 8 and 7's pushing it, because then they'll copy the way I say it and they'll do a poor job of it, right? It'll just be a bad copy of an adult. But at 5, an actor like this is literally not sophisticated enough to copy adult intonation, and so sometimes a line reading is necessary to help them emotionally understand a line. That exercise of paraphrasing that I do with kids around 8 or 9, where I'm like, okay, say, wow, that's great, and now say the line like that. That's not necessarily as effective with this group. So you probably just want to play with Victoria and see which one's more effective with her. But at least for the next year or two, you don't have to be afraid of giving her a line read when you need it, because she's still going to say it like her, because she just probably is not sophisticated enough to say it like you, even if she wants to. So that's my opinion on that one. And then here's the second one. So again, nice clean background. The yellow pops against the blue, in a nice way. And in my opinion, I know that some people are like, don't use those bright colors, but especially if you're going out for, happy kids, and commercials, I just don't think you can go wrong with jewel tones.
They brought us paints.
Don't touch any of it.
Why? What's wrong, Mum?
Just stay here a moment.
Great. And so again, she's got the lines, the eye lines are clear, there's clear opinions built in the scene. And Claudine, you talked to me about this, or we talked about this a number of weeks ago, but I hear you keeping your voice down, and so she's considerably louder than you are, which is a strong technical improvement that you've made to the tape from before. In fact, I think everybody so far has been louder than their reader. So just throwing it out there, that's a real easy mistake to make for anybody who's watching this tape, who hasn't been sitting in on the lessons regularly. Make sure that if you're the reader and you're off camera, that you have your voice quite a bit lower. And I think it's usually a good idea to do a test clip first, to see if to make sure that the reader is not louder than the actor. Right. I would be tempted to put a little bit of physicality into this, to have her like lean against whatever this is behind her if she's not sitting in a chair, and then come off of it and just like come towards the paints, and come back over towards the mum. It's possible that if you did that because she's 5, that it would just get too fidgety, but I tend to like a little bit of physicality. I like a little bit of the body telling the story. Aside from that, I don't think there's much to adjust about a tape like this. Claudine, do you have any questions about those notes?
Thanks for the first one. When after you said about promise, I hadn't thought about her being pleased afterwards. I didn't think about that, so that's good, because I'll know that for future. And it was tough, this one, because we were she'd never done an American accent before. So we were concentrating on the accent rather than the acting.
And it didn't come across like, if she was trying to do an American accent, we sure couldn't tell it. It's to my North American ears, it just sounded, like a UK accent to me.
Oh, okay.
And so, but again, maybe that's proof of concept for this idea that like at 5, there's just only so much adjustment they can do.
Yeah. But no, that's good. No, it's interesting. Yeah, I hadn't thought about doing that with the paints as well. Moving in to look at the paints, I just thought about pointing. I was just trying to make it simple for her, I think.
Of course. And it's one of those things that like maybe you only wait and do after you've got the take that you've got here. Basically you've got the safety take, because at 5, like she's going to burn out pretty quick. Like she's only going to have so many runs of it in her. And with 5-year-olds, I'll do fidget breaks, right? So, especially if there's a technical thing that requires us to redo it, as we get into like, spending 10 minutes working on the same scene, okay, I'll say, okay, fidget break, get all your fidgets out in 10, 9, 8, and the kids and we'll do handstands and we'll just like wiggle around and they'll flop on the floor, and I mean, I think those are good for all actors. It's just that like I can only get away with doing them with the 7 and under set. I kind of wish I could make everybody do fidget breaks, because I know that for myself as an actor, once I get into that, like, no, something was off the last take. This time I'm gonna get it right. Like the takes just get like tighter and tighter and tighter the more focused I get on getting it right instead of just being really present with it.
She takes a fidget break after every take. She's gone.
Good. That's really wise, and that's great that you don't crack down on that. When auditions were happening in person, I would often see parents in waiting rooms trying to crack down, on the behavior of their children, and I'm like, I get that you're trying to be polite to the other people here, but you're doing so at the expense of their performance in the room. Right, like if they go in, sort of like rigidly behaved, and then they get in there, and the casting director's like, "Now be fun and loose." Like that's going to be really hard. So that's great that she's taking all the fidget breaks. Okay, I've run us a little bit over, which Ireland, I gotta say, kind of normal. I do that a lot. So if you're ever here and it hits 4:30 and you're like, I have to go to get to my cello lesson or whatever, like just do it. You're good. Thanks for sticking around, everybody. Candy, did you have any questions? I know that you're somewhere that makes it hard to do much talking to us today, but do you have any questions about my notes on your scene? Okay. Well, if you do, then please feel free to email them to me. And I will respond by email. And the tapes from Victoria and from Christian that I didn't get to today, I will review for next Tuesday. And in the meantime, I would love to see more of your self-tapes. Please send them my way, because everyone is an asset, not just for you and benchmarking your progress, but also like for everybody who gets a chance to watch it. Watching a range of tapes, I think, is good for everybody to get a feel for how it's working out there right now. Okay. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
My
Bye.
pleasure.
Thank you.